They told you awakening would feel like peace, that it would arrive wrapped in light, love, and certainty. But what if the truth is far more raw and far more real? Carl Jung didn't teach awakening as an escape into the heavens. He saw it as a descent into the depths, a confrontation with the shadow, a death of the ego, a complete unraveling of the identity you thought was you, because before you can rise, you must dissolve. This journey isn't for the faint of heart. It begins not with angels, but with archetypes, not with joy, but with disorientation. Yet for those brave enough to walk through the fire, something extraordinary happens. They don't just wake up, they remember who they've always been. In this video, we unveil what spiritually awakened people truly experience through the piercing clarity of Carl Jung's wisdom. These are not just ideas, they are activations. If you've ever felt like you're falling apart, you may, in truth, be falling into awakening. Let's begin. Most people imagine spiritual awakening as a burst of bliss, a euphoric opening to higher dimensions, angelic insights, and endless peace. But that's not how it begins. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He warned that true awakening starts when the soul begins to withdraw its projections, exposing the raw, uncomfortable truths we've buried beneath the surface. It feels more like being disoriented than enlightened, like dying rather than being reborn. The real awakening feels like falling apart. The mind, so accustomed to control and identity, begins to dissolve. This collapse isn't a punishment. It's a necessary disintegration. Before the phoenix can rise, the old self must burn. Jung called it enantiodromia, the phenomenon where everything eventually turns into its opposite. Awakening starts not with peace, but with chaos. Not with light, but with shadow. This is why so many stop the journey before it truly begins. The ego panics, grasping at old versions of self, screaming to maintain the illusion, but the soul whispers, "Let go." The universe begins to dismantle everything that isn't aligned with your true essence. Relationships, careers, beliefs, they fall like leaves in autumn. And though it feels like loss, it is sacred pruning. What dies is what was never truly you. Jung didn't romanticize awakening. He called it a confrontation with the unconscious, a psychic revolution that demands your full attention. It's the moment when the unconscious erupts into consciousness, no longer content to be ignored. Nightmares, triggers, emotional breakdowns. These are not signs of regression. They are invitations to evolve. Each pain is a portal, each collapse a calling. And here's the paradox. The more painful it feels, the more progress you're actually making. Awakening shatters illusions. It doesn't comfort, it reveals. And in that raw truth, something extraordinary begins to grow. A power that was dormant, a light that was hidden beneath your persona. This is why Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because true awakening isn't a comfort zone, it's an initiation. Spiritual awakening doesn't just bring light, it drags up the darkness you've been avoiding for lifetimes. Carl Jung's most radical teaching was that enlightenment isn't about becoming pure light, it's about making the darkness conscious. This is shadow work, the sacred alchemy of turning inner poison into power, and without it, awakening remains incomplete. Even dangerous. The shadow isn't evil. It's everything you've disowned, rejected, or suppressed to survive in a world that punishes authenticity. Your anger, your envy, your sexual energy, your mystical gifts, your deep grief. All exiled into the unconscious, forming what Jung called the shadow self. It hides in dreams, projections, addictions, and emotional triggers. And awakening pulls back the curtain, forcing you to face it all. Most people try to bypass this part. They cling to love and light narratives, trying to meditate their way out of discomfort. But the real ones, the truly awakened, know that until you embrace your shadow, you can't hold real light. You can't love fully if you fear your rage. You can't create freely if shame rules your inner world. Integrating the shadow is the only path to true wholeness. Shadow work isn't about fixing yourself, it's about reclaiming what was lost. When you meet your shadow with compassion instead of judgment, it transforms. The monster becomes a guide, the wound becomes a doorway. This is where your greatest power lives, not in the parts you show the world, but in what you were taught to hide. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So the awakened don't fear the shadow. They sit with it, dialogue with it. They know each piece of darkness is a fragment of their soul, waiting to be brought home. And as they do this work, something miraculous unfolds. A deeper strength emerges, a fierce clarity, a liberated heart. Because in integrating the shadow, they become what Jung called the self, the union of all opposites, the awakened whole. Once the veil begins to lift, reality starts whispering. Patterns appear where randomness once ruled. Numbers repeat, conversations align, dreams foretell. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy logic but speak directly to the soul. For the spiritually awakened, synchronicity becomes the universe's sacred language, guiding them like breadcrumbs through a multidimensional forest. At first, it feels eerie. You think of someone, and they call. You're struggling with a choice, and a book falls open to the exact message you needed. The mind wants to dismiss it, just chance. But the awakened know better. They've begun to trust the invisible currents that move beneath the surface of what we call reality. Jung believed synchronicity was the bridge between the personal unconscious and the cosmic order. Proof that inner and outer worlds are in dialogue. This shift marks a fundamental change in consciousness. The awakened begin to live in alignment with meaning, not just logic. They sense that they are not separate from the universe, but a co-creator within it. They move through life not with force, but with intuition. Synchronicities validate their path, confirm their healing, and even warn them when they're out of alignment. It's not magic, it's the quantum feedback loop between intention and manifestation. These experiences increase in frequency the more aligned you become. The more you clear your internal static, fear, doubt, resistance, the clearer the signals get. The awakened begin to dance with life rather than chase it. They stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is life showing me?" Synchronicity becomes not just a sign, but a conversation, a living reminder that the universe is intelligent and interactive. Jung said, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. And once those eyes are open, they rarely close again. Every encounter becomes an oracle. Every moment, a potential transmission. This is the language of soul, non-linear, symbolic, and full of wonder. And those who are truly awake, they learn to read it like scripture written across the sky. There comes a moment on the path of awakening that feels like dying, not physically, but existentially. Carl Jung called it the death of the ego, and it is perhaps the most terrifying threshold the soul must cross. It feels like losing your identity, your anchors, your sense of I. Who you thought you were begins to unravel, not piece by piece, but all at once, like the crumbling of a false temple. And yet, this ego death is the very crucible of spiritual transformation. The ego isn't the enemy. It's the mask you wear to survive. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. But awakening reveals that this story is incomplete, limited, and often built on fear. So when the soul starts rising, the ego resists. It screams, clings, rationalizes. It tells you that without it, you'll be nothing. But the deeper truth is this: ego death is not annihilation, it's liberation. The self is not destroyed, it's revealed. The pain comes from identification. We grieve the loss of the persona because we believed it was us. The career, the labels, the roles, the status, gone. But what's left in the silence? Something deeper, something eternal. Jung believed that beyond the ego lies the self, the totality of our being, connected to the infinite. Ego death strips away what is false, so the self can emerge like a lotus from mud. This stage is sacred, but it's rarely talked about because it doesn't look pretty. It looks like depression, isolation, identity crisis. But these are not breakdowns. They are breakthroughs. The dark night of the ego precedes the dawn of the soul. The awakened endure it not because they enjoy it, but because they understand its necessity. They know what waits on the other side: clarity, peace, purpose, and the quiet power of presence. And once the ego dies, something else is born. A consciousness that doesn't need to prove, defend, or control. A presence that simply is. Jung taught that this is the birth of the authentic self, the true being, free from societal hypnosis. It doesn't mean the ego disappears forever, but now it becomes a servant of the soul, not its master, and that's the real miracle of awakening. Beneath the surface of every human life runs a deeper, mythic current, a symbolic journey that stretches across time, culture, and consciousness. Carl Jung called these patterns archetypes, universal blueprints embedded in the collective unconscious. And when someone begins to spiritually awaken, these ancient forces come alive. They no longer watch stories. They realize they are inside one. Dreams become more vivid. Symbols start to repeat. Animals, numbers, and elements appear with a strange potency. The awakened individual begins to notice that their life mirrors the hero's journey. The call, the refusal, the descent into the underworld, and the return with sacred knowledge. Jung saw this as the path of individuation, the integration of all aspects of the psyche into a unified self. What's wild is that these archetypes aren't just abstract ideas. They move, they possess. The shadow becomes the dragon. The higher self becomes the wise old man or the goddess. The awakened don't just read mythology, they live it, and in doing so they gain access to inner forces that guide, challenge, and transform them. They realize the gods were never outside us. They are psychological energies within. As the soul awakens, dreams take on a new meaning. They're not just mental noise. They are messages from the unconscious, encoded in archetype. A journey through a dark forest? The initiation? A crumbling house? The ego collapsing. Meeting a child or animal, a return to innocence and instinct. The awakened begin to read these dreams like scrolls of forgotten wisdom. Jung taught that when we align with archetypal forces consciously, we no longer live a fragmented life. We begin to walk the sacred path encoded in our very DNA. The journey becomes more than personal, it becomes transpersonal. And that changes everything, because now every challenge becomes a quest, every choice a rite of passage, every breath a step deeper into the mystery of who and what we truly are. There's a quiet truth few speak aloud. Awakening is beautiful, but often lonely. Not because something is wrong, but because you're no longer vibrating at the frequency of who you used to be. Carl Jung understood this psychic isolation. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but it also separates you from the herd." And in that separation, the awakened often walk through a desert of solitude. Friendships start to dissolve. Conversations feel hollow. The things that once excited you, gossip, consumption, competition, now feel draining. You see through social masks, and it becomes harder to pretend. It's not arrogance, it's simply energetic dissonance. Your vibration shifts, and people sense it, even if they can't explain it. Some will drift away, others may reject you, and some will fear your transformation because it reflects what they're not yet ready to face. But this isn't punishment, it's purification. The soul needs silence to integrate its new state of being. The awakened are pulled inward, not to suffer, but to remember. In solitude, you begin to hear your inner voice again. You reconnect with your essence, not through external validation, but through internal resonance. It's here, in this sacred aloneness, that real alignment begins to blossom. Jung knew that the journey of individuation demands this separation. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly surrounded by noise. It must cocoon, dissolve, and reform. This is the same process for the soul. The old social self must melt away so that the higher self can emerge. And while it feels isolating, it is also profoundly empowering. Because in the stillness, you no longer need others to define your worth. And then, something miraculous happens. New connections begin to form, ones based not on history, but on energy. Soul family, mirrors, allies who speak your language without words. The loneliness begins to fade, replaced by a deeper belonging, not to a group, but to the cosmos. The awakened realized they were never alone. They were simply being prepared for sacred union with those who truly see them. One of the most profound shifts in a spiritual awakening is the movement from thinking to knowing. Carl Jung spoke of this evolution as the rise of the intuitive function, the ability to perceive truths directly, without logical steps. It's not about abandoning the intellect, it's about transcending it. Because intuition doesn't come from the mind, it comes from the soul. At first, this transition feels strange. The awakened begin to notice that answers arrive before questions are asked. Gut feelings override rational arguments. They feel a yes or no in their body before their brain can even analyze the situation. This isn't coincidence, it's consciousness tuning to a higher signal. Intuition is the language of the unified field, the place where all possibilities exist simultaneously. Jung taught that when the unconscious becomes conscious, we gain access to archetypal intelligence, insights beyond time, beyond conditioning. This is why the awakened often begin to experience spontaneous clarity. They just know who to trust, where to go, or what step to take next. This knowing isn't loud, it's quiet, soft, but it's undeniable. It cuts through confusion like a blade of light through fog. This intuitive awareness also brings a new kind of discernment. The awakened can feel hidden motives, sense energetic patterns, and decode deeper meanings in ordinary interactions. It's as if their perception expands in all directions. They're no longer fooled by appearances. They can see both the shadow and the potential in others, and choose how to engage with wisdom instead of reaction. And perhaps most powerfully, this shift reconnects them to inner authority. No longer do they seek permission, approval, or proof from external sources. They begin to trust themselves, not in a prideful way, but in a deeply embodied, humble way. Because they've remembered what we all once knew, that the greatest wisdom doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from listening deeper. After the fire of awakening, after the darkness, the silence, the ego death, and the rising intuition, something begins to shift again. But this time, it's not about inner healing. It's about integration. The spiritually awakened reach a stage Jung would describe as the return of the self, a homecoming to wholeness. And with it comes a new mission, to bring what they've remembered back into the world. This is the final phase of the archetypal journey, what Joseph Campbell called the return with the elixir. But it's also the most misunderstood. The awakened don't escape the world. They re-enter it with new eyes. They become bridges between realms, walking paradoxes, who carry ancient truths into modern chaos, who live in two realities at once. They are grounded, yet cosmic, present, yet timeless. Jung believed the goal of individuation wasn't detachment, it was service. Once the self is realized, the soul naturally wants to give, to heal, to teach, to hold space. not because of egoic desire, but because of energetic overflow. The awakened become lighthouses for others still lost in the fog. Not perfect, not enlightened, but embodied, living examples that transformation is not only possible, it is inevitable. And here's the miracle. They no longer need to convince, convert, or control. Their energy speaks louder than words. They become tuning forks, subtly shifting the frequency of every room they enter. Their presence alone becomes an invitation, a silent reminder that something more exists, that you too are infinite, that this life is not all there is. Carl Jung once said, "You are not meant to fit in, you are here to awaken." And once the awakened return, they no longer try to fit in. They create new paradigms, new systems, new ways of being that honor the soul, because they've seen the truth. They've met the self, and now they walk as bridges between the visible and the invisible, the remembered and the forgotten, the human and the divine. Spiritual awakening isn't a destination, it's a sacred disruption. It dismantles the false so the true can emerge. It's messy, lonely, beautiful, terrifying, but above all, it's real. And in a world addicted to illusion, reality is the most radical thing you can choose. Carl Jung taught that the soul doesn't just seek healing, it seeks wholeness, and that wholeness includes your shadow, your light, your silence, and your fire. So if you've been breaking down, shedding layers, questioning everything, you're not lost. You're becoming. You are the bridge between seen and unseen, between past and potential, between the self you were and the self you are remembering. And your awakening is not just yours. It ripples through time, through bloodlines, through the collective. Your healing is ancestral. Your truth is transformational. So trust the path, even when it trembles. Walk it with courage. And know deeply that the universe is not outside of you. It's within you, speaking in dreams, symbols, synchronicities, waiting for you to listen. If this resonated like this video, subscribe to the Cosmic Awakening channel and share it with someone whose soul is stirring. The age of forgetting is ending. The time of remembering is now.